Okay, so good afternoon everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And thank you so much for joining us today for our Le Cordon Bleu Master of Gastronomic Tourism webinar. Today we are talking to the Academic Director for Le Cordon Bleu, Dr. Roger Haden. And Dr. Haden, not only does he teach in the program currently, but Roger was also instrumental in the design of the program and also the partnership between Le Cordon Bleu and Southern Cross University. Roger has been involved in food for much of his career, including a stint as personal chef in residence to the Australian High Commissioner based in London, and 6 years working for the University of Adelaide in the graduate program of gastronomy, where he was also heavily involved with and directed the Research Centre for the History of Food and Drink. And also, Roger has hosted several international conferences as part of that role. So thank you very much for joining us today, Roger.
Pleasure, Sophie.
In particular, we're going to talk to Roger today about two of the units that are available in Session 1, which starts on the 29th of February next year. Those units are Principles of Gastronomy and Food and Wine Writing. So we look forward to lots of new students joining us in February. We've had lots of people ask us about these units, so we thought it would be a great opportunity to get Roger to come along today and talk with us. And if you do have any questions, Hazel or others as they join us, please either type up the question in the comments or feel free to ask Roger as we go along, or we can also answer them at the end. So Roger, thank you for being here today. I know it's been a bit of a rush to get here, and I appreciate your time. Can you perhaps start by giving us a bit of background on the inception of the Master of Gastronomic Tourism, which you were involved with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks for the opportunity today. And hello, everybody. The Master of Gastronomic Tourism really came from my time at the University of Adelaide, where we had the gastronomy program, which was also in partnership with Le Cordon Bleu. And while I was at the university, one of the subjects in the program was gastronomic tourism. And although I was very interested in gastronomy in general, that was the first time I'd really been involved with gastronomic tourism as such. And it was such a fascinating subject because most of the innovation and interesting work being done out there in the real world and industry was in this area of tourism. Of course, tourism is a huge industry in Australia and around the world, and when you couple that with eating and drinking, i.e. gastronomy, there's a lot of activity, a lot of new business, a lot of innovation, a lot of exciting things going on, and a lot of interest from academia as well. So a lot of academic research going on in the field, and it seemed to me that there was real scope to develop a whole program around gastronomic tourism. So when I came to work for Le Cordon Bleu and left the university, it seemed like an opportune time to develop a whole program around gastronomic tourism.
Oh, fantastic! And it sounds like a good reason to start a program, particularly with the pleasurable side that comes with the food.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it is a really engaging and fun area of research. There are lots of applications in different types of businesses. So, of course, it's not just the food and wine businesses as such, the celladors and the small food producers and the artisan, manufacturers and what have you. It's really about rural communities and regional communities as well, working together to raise the profile and the local identity of their small town, for example, based around food production, yes, and fine dining and other products and services, but also really bringing all the regional people together and businesses together, because it's only together that they provide that service to tourists. And so there's lots of scope for our graduates in the program now to engage at different levels with regional tourism and gastronomic tourism in particular.
So it's that application of gastronomy using the tourism industry as the sort of
absolutely
field for industry relevance.
And the other thing that I really like about it too is that personally, I've always, as a trained chef, I've always had a love of food, obviously, and of course Cordon Bleu is very strongly focused on gastronomy, and that love of foods is very important too, because it highlights quality. And I think it's very important today that, and it's great to see that quality is really coming back into the world of food, given that we live in a society, at least in Australia, where there's so much industrially produced, highly processed foods, and we know there's lots of health problems with all that stuff. And it's great to see that artisan and boutique foods are coming back, quality foods. A lot of it is produced in regional, small towns by artisan producers, so small producers. So, what I'm saying here is that quality helps also to drive innovation and regional redevelopment and re-energising local communities around the small producers. It's great for health, it's great for the economy, it's great for the community. So there's some really good outcomes from this gastronomic tourism program, potentially at least. The sky's the limit.
And that, I guess, answers one of my later questions. We will move on to the units in a minute, but one of the questions that we get asked a lot is who would be interested in this program, and people are, I guess, a little bit nervous whether they can, take the leap, take the plunge into joining our program. So, you've sort of answered that question, but who do you think this program, who would be interested in this program, Roger?
Yeah, well, as you say, the program has a broad scope, so and we try to keep the program with that diversity of subject matter, because it stretches right across the field from tourism business right to the gastronomy and history of restaurants and what have you. So by its very nature, it's attracting a wide range of people. Having said that, it's also attracting more mature age students, because we're getting people who would call themselves foodies, for example, who really already have that passion for food and have never really had the capacity or the circumstance to be able to really either study or work in that field. So it's also attracting people who really want to make a difference and get involved in that kind of community activity as well. Get out there into the tourism industry, perhaps, and really contribute to that idea of making the world a better place through producing good products. So all in all, we're probably attracting more mature age students from a diversity of backgrounds. That is both, international students, but I also mean from a diversity of career backgrounds. We have people who are accountants and lawyers, for example, who've had a career perhaps in those fields, but now really want to follow their passion a bit more and turn to food studies. We have people working in the food industry who really want to sort of upscale their knowledge so that they can, contribute more to their business in terms of, what they know and how they can innovate. So I can keep talking about it, but
both sides of the scale,
I think we get a real diversity of. I think particularly the diversity is across the scale of where people are coming from. People with commerce degrees, people who've done some hospitality, people in tourism, people in food, but also law, accounting, commerce. You name it. It's one of those degrees that I like to call a lifestyle degree. Not because it's something people do just for fun, but it is fun, but really because it's sort of fitting in with what people want at this particular time in their lives, and offering them new opportunities to do something different with their careers if they want to pursue that as a career.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. We will now move on and talk a little bit about the units. the first unit that will be held in session 1 is Principles of Gastronomy, which was sort of a foundation unit in the previous degree. Can you just perhaps talk a bit about Principles of Gastronomy?
Yeah, sure. Principles of Gastronomy, as you say, was a foundational subject in the old degree, and that's why we carried it over, because it really does present the core philosophy of gastronomy, which is really important. A lot of people, of course, think of gastronomy as being all about sort of elite dining, but of course, in our understanding of gastronomy and in the higher education understanding, it's a much more broadly based study of food culture in general. So everything really related to food, and so logically we start with the history of modern gastronomy, which begins in France, and of course that ties in very nicely with Le Cordon Bleu, which also has a long history in culinary arts, of course. So in Principles of Gastronomy, we look at the issue of quality that I raised before. So right at the heart of gastronomy is this respect for food, and we sort of raise that up, I guess, as an ideal, and trace the history of that, how an interest in gastronomy built up over the 19th century, and we talk about the rise of the restaurant. So it's really interesting history, and also at the same time providing students with a really nice foundation, which often coincides, of course, with their own love of food that's already there. So they bring their love of food to the program, and they find suddenly that there's all these historical precedents for that there in the history of gastronomy, and it's a really strong way to begin the program. Most of the students really enjoy it.
So that will take students up to what sort of point in history are they looking at?
Well, we tend to bring it up to what we normally call the Industrial Revolution. So and in terms of sort of food production, it's really more the late 19th century rather than the early 19th century. So we're talking about a century of history really in Principles of Gastronomy, but we do overlap and talk about some contemporary issues, but we tend to talk about the contemporary issues in food and drink in contemporary society, which is the follow-on subject to Principles. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so mainly looking at a European gastronomic history.
Yes, it's mainly European because it initially was France that kick-started modern gastronomy in the Western world, and then gastronomy as such developed around the world, we do use examples from other parts of the world, but gastronomy is one of these things that's such a massive field that we try and focus it on Western gastronomy because it has a fairly clearly articulated history, and it makes it more practical to teach it from that perspective.
No, it sounds fantastic. To be fair,
we had an idea for an elective subject. It's sort of waiting in the wings, and which would be sort of Japanese gastronomy probably, or perhaps Chinese, or if we wanted to spread it to the Asian region in general, we'd cover several countries. But to all respect to those Asian countries, Japanese gastronomy is, it goes back many centuries. So you've got the scope to really produce something quite of a large scale there. So we've got to be sort of careful how we do it, and but it's certainly something we'd like to do. Sort
of be a drop in the ocean compared to what's actually.
Well, yes, I mean, it's something we offer students to explore in their research, but the program in general focuses more on the European and new world traditions of gastronomy.
Terrific, thank you. And the other program that is available in session 1 that we thought we'd ask you to talk about today is food and wine writing. So are you able to tell us a bit about that unit, Roger?
Yeah, well I can. Food and wine writing is an interesting one because I suppose most people hearing that title would think, oh yes, food writers reviewing restaurants, and of course these days we have bloggers and other modes of electronic formats that people use. But of course, food and wine writing today is really quite diverse. So we try to give students the opportunity to explore a whole range of different options. As I mentioned, you have the bloggers and you have your food reviewers, but there are also there's lots of need for copywriters as well out there. Lots of advertising, lots of marketing, lots of products that need someone who's very good with words to build that product and express the producer's product profiles, and so really we're looking at it really as a course that's promoting a whole range of writing skills and not just that sort of typical idea of a restaurant reviewer or a copywriter.
So building your knowledge of creative writing,
building the knowledge of creative writing. Of course, obviously there's the opportunity to read others' work, and so there's an emphasis on the history of food writing and wine writing. Wine writing, of course, in its own right's quite a different. There's a whole different knowledge involved with wine, of course. As a wine expert or a wine taster or a wine enthusiast, you have to have a completely different kind of vocabulary. So across food writing and wine writing, we give students a lot of help and support with building their vocabularies, and of course the usual writerly skills, expressing themselves, etc., which one would expect in a food and wine writing course. But I think the main point about food and wine writing is to give students a sort of, I guess, broaden their horizons to some extent. A lot of students would come in perhaps wanting to be quote-unquote food writers, and a difficult thing to do in today's world when we have so much food and wine writing. So that's both a good thing and a bad thing, in the sense that you've got lots of opportunities, lots of publications now have food columns. Food's been written about everywhere, so there's the opportunities. But of course you've got much more competition as well as food writers. So to extend people's understanding of what what these skills can, what opportunities these skills might give them in the market is part of what we try to do.
And you teach in the program, so how do you find the online learning? I mean, how does that work? You as a unit assessor, can you give us a bit of your experience as a teacher in that course? How that works?
Yeah, sure. Well, Southern Cross University use the Blackboard system, which is used all around the world, and it's a very capable learning management system. So anyone who's studied online would have encountered something similar. And for those people that haven't studied online, it's very simple to use. And of course, the main thing about online learning is that it's flexible, so that the students can join in online classes, after work, for example. So we try to arrange times that will suit students who might live in different parts of the world and who often do. So that's one of the benefits. The other thing about online teaching is that it provides students with a different range of tools so that we can assess them slightly differently. For example, a student might get the opportunity to present what we call a sort of a mashup, so they can select different video segments and put them together and make a presentation. Now, if that sounds daunting for people who have never done online study before, we provide all the support you need for that. But of course, the point is, though, that there are a whole range of different tools that you can use, and some of them, it might be just making a recorded message or doing a video presentation, or it could be something standard like a piece of written work. So the online platform gives flexibility for students who need to study at different times. It's a one-stop shop for them to submit their assignments and get feedback from their lecturers. It's an opportunity for them to join in group sessions and talk to other students online and build their relationships with other students. And it's an opportunity to study in a different way and explore different modes of media presentation. And going back to the food and wine writing, there again you get the opportunity. If you want to create a blog, you can sort of do it through the online learning system quite easily, and of course have the support from your lecturing staff to do that.
Right, so it'd be a great way if you were thinking about setting up your own food blog. You can use the structure of that 12-week unit to help you, guide you.
I don't teach food and wine writing. I'm a bit jealous. I wouldn't mind doing that, but I'm sure one of the assessments in food and wine writing would probably give students the option to create a blog or a website, and maybe present images as well as written text. And video for that matter as well. So, opportunities to let students engage with very contemporary media, and of course the website and the learning management system gives students the opportunity to do that.
Terrific. We do have Hazel, thank you. We have a question from Hazel.
Okay.
Hazel would like to ask if having a master's degree, a certificate or a graduate diploma from an online course, is that enough for a Filipino to work in Australia? This is about the visa requirement. Hazel, there's no visa attached to this program, so this program you need to remain in your country of residence. And in regards to whether that would be enough to work in Australia, I would suggest you'd need to talk to a migration agent. Would that be right, Roger?
Yes, that's right. I think what you say is correct, Sophie. But better to check with an expert, because these things do change from time to time, and we're not always, at least I'm not always completely up to date with these kinds of requirements. But check with your a local expert on visa requirements for Australia.
We do have a graduate who lives in the Philippines from our former program too, from our Master of Arts in Gastronomy.
Madeline Pineda. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are other people perhaps in the Philippines. If you wanted to talk to those people, Hazel, we could certainly get you in touch. Roger, we haven't actually mentioned what unit you teach in. What was the unit that you teach in?
Aesthetics of food and wine. So that's all about. It's really all about the sensory side of our experience when we eat food and drink, not just wine but other drinks as well. And it goes into not just the sensory component, so not just the flavours and the textures that we experience in the glass or in our mouths when we eat something, but all the other aspects that influence our enjoyment of a meal. So this extends to things like the cutlery and the glassware that you use has a role to play in the degree of enjoyment that you have. But really, when you think about it, we don't think about it enough, I suppose that's the point, and the course is really designed to open people's minds to all the influences that affect what we taste. People often assume that tasting is something that sort of happens quite automatically. You put something in your mouth and you taste it and you think, that tastes nice, or that doesn't taste nice. But in actual fact, our brains have an enormous amount to do with what we taste, so it's not just the simple kind of chemical process. In other words, if you're feeling a little bit off colour, or as most of you will probably recognise, you often foods start to taste differently. Colours affect our taste, so if you're sitting in a room that's blue, you're going to taste things differently. if you colour a glass of red wine, a glass of white wine red with red food colouring, and then it's presented to you without you knowing that, you actually taste red wine characteristics in the white wine because your eyes are telling your brain that a red wine's coming and experience a red wine. So when you try the red wine, which is actually white wine, you taste the red wine characteristics. So the course really explores a lot of these, what we call aesthetics, which are all the sensory components from sight, sound, touch, smell, and obviously taste, and explores that world and also crosses over with the experimental side of gastronomy today. So we look at some of the famous chefs from around the world who are doing lots of sensory sort of experimentation. So you've got people like Haden Blumenthal, who gives you a headset to wear and plays sounds of the seashore while he's giving you a seafood dish to eat. So you're getting this kind of soundtrack of the sea while you're eating this dish. And of course the argument there is that the sound is affecting the way you're tasting the dish. And so there's a lot of experimentation going on there. So we cross over and look at a lot of that. It's really interesting. It's a very sort of up-to-the-minute contemporary look at dining from a multi-sensory perspective.
So that, I mean, not only is that interesting to study from a academic sort of point of view in your career and moving into your, your chosen sort of industry or career path, but that is simply fascinating. Every single week you're learning something new that will enhance your dining experience and your flavour enhancement at your nightly meal. There's
really too much material. There's so many interesting things going on and a lot of research, and this is part of the reason why gastronomy is such a growing field in higher education. I keep an eye on what's going on around the world with higher education and gastronomy, and there are new programs starting up all around the world in the East and the West, and much more interest being paid to food, more books coming out, more journals, and it's great to see because it means people are taking food a little more seriously, which to my mind also means that we're not taking it for granted, and this has been a bit of a problem in the past, that food's something that we take for granted because it comes very easily. We go to the supermarket, we buy the food, we go home. And it's only in the last 20, 25 years that there's been more of an interest in moving beyond that and understanding more about our food, gaining more knowledge. In this area of sensory aesthetics that I was just discussing before, it's not as if people haven't thought about these things before. So even the first academics who were thinking about gastronomy 200 years ago in France, and this is in the modern era, were quite familiar with the idea that all the senses play a role in our enjoyment of food. But it's only very recently that all the science has come along to kind of prove that these theories were actually correct and to show exactly how this occurs in terms of what our brains are doing and how the brain functions and that sort of thing. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds exciting. And each of these units that Roger has talked about, principles of gastronomy, food and wine writing, and aesthetics of food and wine, they're all part of the master's program, but they are also available as single units of study. Units take about 12 weeks, is that right, Roger?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
So you can come and do 12 weeks, or you can continue for 4 units, which is the graduate certificate, or you can go on to the full master's program. So not sure if Hazel or Mega or anyone else that's joined us today have any questions of Roger while we've got him.
IELTS. So a question about English language literacy levels. I think it's 6.5. 6.5.
So Mega, it's 6.5 for the Masters or 6.0 for the graduate certificate. So either of those or the equivalent, depending on your background. So there are lots of different English proficiency tests, and it depends on your background and what you've done. Roger, what do you think distinguishes gastronomic tourism from normal tourism?
Well, I sort of touched on that earlier when we were talking about how the program started, but I think essentially it's sort of applied gastronomy. So gastronomy is the study of food culture, and within that it's exploring from an aesthetic point of view, so with an interest in the sensory enjoyment of food. It's also an interest in quality, and through that, I guess the true gastronome is someone who absolutely loves food, but also understands that knowledge of food is also knowledge of people and places and the world in general, really. People all around the world love their food, and gastronomy is as much about protecting the capacity to produce good food and quality food, so sustainability and ethics are very much a part of gastronomy. But when you move that into the tourism area, obviously you're applying those principles to a business context, but it's still very much about hospitality. Tourism, obviously, people coming from overseas to visit Australia, and we want to give them nice food and wine while they're here. Yes, that's gastronomic tourism, but if we sort of open that up a bit more, it's also about how to promote communities to build their identity around gastronomy and to support the notion of sustainable production of quality food.
So helping regions develop their tourism around their food culture and bringing that out as a unique attribute of that region.
And it's different everywhere, but certainly in Australia we have a history of food production, but so often with highly industrialised countries, even though we've got a big rural community in Australia, a lot of the old food practices have gone by the wayside and been superseded by industrial food production factories, and bread would be a good example. So we've got lots of old brick ovens that we use to bake bread for small communities all around Australia, and of course most of them have gone. A lot of them are still standing but not used. But in recent years people have rediscovered them, and of course from a gastronomic perspective this is fantastic because those ovens bake absolutely brilliantly, so they produce wonderful bread, and of course the artisan bakers know that, and they know they've got a market, so they move out from Melbourne or Sydney and they go and discover an old, people who have done this, and they go and rediscover the bakery, and suddenly they've got a viable business. It brings tourists to the town, they love the bread and they tell their friends, and so it's a win-win situation, as we say, for everybody concerned. And of course it flows through to the producer of the flour that the baker uses, and then there might be someone who comes to look after the oven, and so it does involve a range of people in the community, and it helps to revitalise revitalise rural communities that in the past, really since the end of the Second World War, have kind of been losing people and to cities, and now there's a little bit more of a an exodus back into rural areas and revitalisation of communities, partly through these gastronomic tourist activities.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And now, just to finish up, Roger, just a couple of more sort of practical questions. How much time would you recommend that students allow, per week, I guess, to undertake their studies? We suggest 10 to 15 hours per unit per session, particularly initially if it's your first unit to familiarise yourself. Do you think that's an accurate suggestion?
Yeah, well, for the unit that I teach, I set reading, and people read at different speeds, of course, and have different rates of absorbing what they read. But I would think between 3 and 6 hours a week
for reading and
for reading and attending the classes as well.
And then
probably some extra time for doing assessment. I mean, if you're interested, you'd probably want to study more.
Yeah.
And I know we set guidelines for times for students to be engaged with study, but some students will get by with less and some will do more. But I would think between at least 3 hours a week outside of the time you might spend online, which would normally be, I usually have a 2-hour session online. Sometimes the student might come for an hour of that, or they might come for 2 hours.
And we have a student online, Mega. Thank you again for your question, Mega. What is the difference between gastronomic tourism, food history and food anthropology?
Oh, okay, well that's a good question. Mega, the difference between, I think really it's more the case that gastronomy, so if we're talking about gastronomy, gastronomy really embraces social sciences like anthropology. So anthropology is really like the study of human beings. So when you study food anthropology, you're studying when you're studying anthropology, you're studying food anthropology because people eat. So what I'm saying here is that food history, food anthropology and gastronomy, they're really all part of the same thing. Gastronomy is the study of food culture, and food culture includes food anthropology. It's just that anthropology takes a particular approach. And of course food history is the same. Historians look at the relationship between people and food stretching right back to ancient times. We don't spend a lot of time looking at ancient history. We look a little bit at the history of, for example, cookbooks. So we would relate that back to ancient Rome, for example. But we don't spend a great deal of time on any particular period until we get to the 19th century when modern gastronomy starts. The study of food is a huge area of study, potentially. Sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, geographers, historians, you name it, that they all have a lot of work to do when they decide that food is their subject. So what we try to do with gastronomic tourism is take the core study of gastronomy and look at the main issues, some of the history, some of the anthropology, some of the sociology. We put that together and then we encourage students to apply that within the context of tourism, which again is a broad field, but in general it gives students a lot of scope to sort of apply what they're learning to real life and situations and sort of business scenarios.
That sounds fabulous. Thank you, Roger. And Roger, if you were thinking of joining this program, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to a new student?
Oh, if the new student wants to join the program, yeah. Advice on what? Academic advice?
Well, I guess, what advice, what would be the
The key thing. Yeah. Well, look, I think in general, of course, I'm a little bit biased because I had a lot to do with the design of the program, but I really think that the program offers a great diversity of opportunities, and I think for anyone coming in to the program as a new student, I think I'd be saying, expect the unexpected, because the study of food really opens a lot of fascinating windows onto the history of human beings, and also offers opportunities to really contribute to something extremely positive. So generally speaking, I think gastronomy is a great gift to the world, and in the last 10, 20 years we've seen a lot more interest in the study of gastronomy, and then through that, of course, people going out with knowledge that they then apply and use in their careers, and this too has a follow-on effect which is also positive. So two things: I think you'll expect the unexpected, and you'll have a chance to discover a way to really contribute through your study, and I really hope that that you're inspired in that sense to take up that opportunity and become more of a gastronomer than you probably already are, because as I said before, so many of the students who do come into the program have a love of food, and I think that's an important ingredient, if I can use that word, in the whole process.
I noticed we've been joined by Fiona. Fiona had a few troubles getting access to the link, so thank you for joining us, Fiona. And if you've got any questions, please do feel free to send them in, because we are about to wrap up. It's been really interesting hearing about Roger's experiences with the program and some of the units. So as I mentioned before, Monday the 29th of February in 2016 will be our next intake. That's session 1, and students can join Principles of Gastronomy or Food and Wine Writing. I think they can also join ICT for Tourism, which is Information, Communication and Technology. And the last unit, I believe, is Tourism and Hospitality Management, so which really looks at what sort of manager you are as a person. So it's looking inwardly rather than sort of outward at the industry. So thank you very much for your time today, Roger. We've really appreciated you coming here and sharing some background on those 3 really interesting subjects. And so if no one's got any more questions, thank you everyone. We wish you a very Merry Christmas. We hope you have a safe and happy holiday break with your families. And please do feel free to get in contact if you've got any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone. Have a gastronomic Christmas.